What's up, friends? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Today, we're going to be breaking down George Pickens and how he could potentially fit with the Packers. We'll do our full scouting report as normal. Before we get there, just one quick note from Thursday. Brandon Cooks received an extension with the Houston Texans, which may not seem like Packers news on the surface, but there were a lot of people who thought that maybe Brandon Cooks could be a target for the Packers. I've discussed that exact scenario on here before, if you remember correctly. I didn't think it was ever a strong possibility. Yes, he's got some of that deep skills. Of course, he has the ability to run after the catch. He's a really fun receiver. There's no two ways about it. However, again, we've talked about it over and over. This is a offense that really wants their players to block on the outside. Yes, he can play on the outside, but he's not an efficient blocker. And all of a sudden, again, you start putting Randall Cobb and Brandon Cooks and Robert Tonyan and all these players on the field that aren't great blockers, and you start running into some issues. So, it wouldn't shock me entirely if Green Bay maybe made a phone call prior to. And again, I think Green Bay is going to have to live a half-life in some capacity. As we've talked about on numerous occasions, whether you want to talk about trade, free agency, draft, however you want to look at it, there's no perfect player that fits everything that Green Bay wants. There just isn't. Either they're way too expensive, either they are past their prime, they are injury prone, they are raw, they're inexperienced, they don't block on the outside. There's something that pretty much everyone is missing, no matter how they acquire them. Whether they get the top receiver in the draft, the best trade target, the best free agent remaining, there's something about them that doesn't fit perfectly. So Green Bay, again, is going to have to accept that, and they're going to have to figure out a way to add talent to this wide receiver room and still be efficient on offense, despite not having their cake and eat it too and getting everything they want at that wide receiver position. So again, I don't think Brandon Cooks was a major, in-play candidate for them to trade for, but whether he was or wasn't, he now will be staying with the Houston Texans, gets that extension, gets a pay raise, and he will for certain not be becoming a Green Bay Packer anytime in the near future. All right, let's jump to George Pickens, because this is a player who could, in fact, become a Green Bay Packer in the near future. So we'll start off like normal. Junior, wide receiver out of Georgia, 6'3", 195. And of course, one of the big things, just turned 21 years of age. So we know that Green Bay values youth and athleticism. He's 21 years old, just turned 21 years old. And then from an athletic standpoint, we've been talking about RASCOR's 93 percentile overall athlete at wide receiver, 89th percentile height, 50th percentile weight, 84th percentile broad jump, 81st percentile 40-yard dash, and a 97th percentile 10-yard split. Now, he only had a 37th percentile vert. He didn't bench press. He didn't do the short shuttle. He didn't do the three cone. So we do have to take this athletic profile with a little bit of grain of salt, because again, I don't think he probably would have tested in the short shuttle or three cone that well. Maybe he would have been good, but I don't think he would have been great in either. He didn't test great in the vertical. Tough to say what he would have benched, but some of those numbers could have brought that overall score down. Still, you love the 6'3" size, the speed, the overall athleticism. He is a very good athlete, and that shows up on tape as well. More on that momentarily. From a statistical standpoint, when you hear George Pickens and you hear people talking about him as a first, second round pick, you go out, you look at his entire profile, you look at his stats, you look at everything, and you go out and you see 2021, 5 catches, 107 yards, and you have to almost do a double take. You're not expecting that, right? And you look at his overall numbers, 2019, he had 49 catches, 727 yards. 2020, 36 catches, 513 yards. And then last season, 5 receptions and 107 yards. You look at the overall production, leaves a lot to be desired. Now, most of you will know already, in 2021, he had a torn ACL that he tore in spring practice, was able to get back for some of the games at the end of the year, used sparingly. It saw some action, but again, only 5 catches for 107 yards. And again, if you look at all of his numbers combined, never had a season with 50-plus catches, never had a season over 800 yards, had 8 touchdowns as a freshman, was never able to replicate that. A long of 52, which was actually in the last game against, or actually I forget, it was Alabama, I think it was. But huge catch in that game for 52 yards. I think that was national championship. So, overall, the player has a lot of traits to like, which we'll get to more in just a moment, but a lot of the individual statistics don't tell a whole side of the story, so you have to sort of get past that. And again, you look at it, he played 12 games as a freshman, 8 games as a sophomore, only 4 games as a junior. So still, productivity is a little bit of a question mark in large part due to injuries and specifically the ACL this past season. All right, let's jump into his positives, though, because there are a lot of things to like about George Pickens. First of all, we know that Green Bay needs an outside wide receiver. We've talked about this ad nauseum. You've got Randall Cobb in the slot. You've got Amari Rodgers in the slot. Alan Lazard plays in the slot. And pretty much any wide receiver that you pick nowadays or even trade for, they're going to have some flexibility to play in the slot, right? So you don't need a dedicated slot receiver. Green Bay really needs outside wide receivers. Well, Pickens is exactly that. He can play the left side. He can play the right side. He has played a little bit in the slot, but his numbers were almost completely equal for how much he played on the left side and how much he played on the right side. Next up is how he wins, and he wins in the final third. Now, he will show the ability to win at the line of scrimmage and win with his hands and win with an outside release. He will win at times with his route running. He will understand how to find his zone and uncover and get open. But for the most part, where he really excels is in the final third, whether that's separating using his physicality against smaller corners, whether that's winning at the catch point, jump ball, contested catches, using strong hands, great body control, catching away from his body, utilizing his catch radius. All of those things are things that he does very, very well. And it makes it so that it's very difficult for a corner who's even in good coverage to win against him. And that's a great trait to have. And that's what you sort of look for as a possession wide receiver, which I deem Pickens to be. You will see him win deep, and he can win to all levels of the field. But where he gets really, really good is, again, when whether it's coming back to the football, whether it's towards the, down the sideline where he's trying to separate at that last moment. It's that final third, and especially at the catch point where he really starts to distance himself and make himself, open and the ability to win the football, right? So even when he's not necessarily open, he can be open because of those traits at the final portion of the catch and winning at the catch point. So that is where I really see him win. The other thing that I will say about him is he is competitive as hell. Right? You don't have to go back further than the ACL, right? He injured his ACL, tore his ACL in spring practice and then made his way back by the end of the season. Just incredible competitive drive and determination to get back and play towards the end of the year. There's a great video out on YouTube of a Georgia practice where he was competing with Eric Stokes, actually, and you could very easily tell his level of competitiveness. In a game against Cincinnati, I think in the semifinals, there's a play where he probably doesn't make the best effort towards the ball. It ends up getting intercepted. What does he do? He comes around the corner and knocks the ball out. Again, just insanely competitive. All right, I didn't get the ball. He intercepted it. I'm still going to make a play and force a fumble after the play. Nakobe Dean, his teammate, linebacker, possible first-round pick, said that he was the toughest competitor that he ever had to practice against. So you start getting the sense of just how competitive that this player is. There are times where he can almost be a bit too competitive, more on that momentarily, but you love his competitive gene and how it comes out and how it shows itself, whether it's in practice, whether it's in games, no matter what, you see it happen and you see it come out more often than not. Again, as I mentioned, he has the ability to win at all levels of the field. He can win in the middle, which, again, is a very important trait, especially if you're going to be that more physical wide receiver over the middle. I know he has a wiry frame, which we'll talk about, but I still see him as a physical wide receiver in how he wins. He knows how to find space. He knows how to separate at the catch point, and he will make himself available to quarterbacks, especially over the middle, and that's exactly what you want to see from this type of receiver. Again, you see him win short. You see him win intermediate. You see him win deep. He can win to all levels of the field. He does a great job walling off defenders and making sure that they're not going to have access to the football, so he can use his body control and he can use his catch radius and he can use his strong hands to go and get the football. Again, he does a great job of coming back to the ball as well, not leaving his quarterback out to dry and not giving the cornerback a chance to make a play on the ball. Again, we talked about the overall athleticism and his size. You talk about a 4.4 40 with a 6'3 wide receiver who's only going to get stronger, and he oozes potential simply because of that. One of the much better traits that I really like of his is his ball tracking down the field. He knows how to get under the ball, get to the point that he needs to, high point the ball when he needs to, but his ability to track it in air, locate it, and go make a play on the ball is a very strong trait and something that's going to serve him very well in the NFL. And then again, you want to look at his overall profile, right? So 5-star recruit out of high school. And then you look at what he did as a freshman in the SEC at the University of Georgia. He was an absolute stud from day one, and you would have liked to have seen him take a jump in year 2, and then you would have liked to have seen him, play and not have the ACL injury in year 3. But if you would have paused time after his freshman year, you'd have said this guy's destined to be a top 20 pick in the draft, based on what his projection was. Some unluckiness and an ACL injury is going to allow him to be a little bit more on the discount rack, I think, and be a little bit more, available to potentially a team like the Packers that's picking in the 20s or maybe even later. But overall, if you would have looked at him as a freshman, he was the Sugar Bowl MVP in his freshman season. Like, what more do you need to know? Like, he was ready from day one in college. And then Dane Brugler, who again just released his draft guide, had a great statistic. 71.1% of his career catches either resulted in a first down or a touchdown. I mean, the guy's a playmaker. And again, I think he's only going to get better. I know that he didn't have a ton of production, but when he was on the field, he was consistently making plays, and that's all you can ask for. Now, as always, we've got some negatives as well. The torn ACL is an issue, right? Like, you didn't want to see him lose the time as a junior. You didn't want to see him lose the time in development. And of course, anytime there's an ACL, there's always fear that maybe the other one could go, or maybe the same one could go again. Those questions start getting raised. So the injury issues, the ACL, that's all going to have to be something that the medical team signs off on. We talked about the production already. You would have loved to have had him, see him have a 70 catch season, 1,000-yard season, a 10 touchdown season, a 70-yard long. Like, you would have loved to see some of that stuff. It's just not there. You can't change it, but you have to still question, is he going to be able to stay healthy, and is he going to be able to have a higher level of production in the NFL than he ever had in college? Those are legitimate questions that are going to have to be asked. Technique, we could go over route running. We could go over releases at the line of scrimmage. He's just not there yet from a technique standpoint. He has a long way to go as an overall route runner, releases at the line of scrimmage, using his hands, especially early in the route, how he runs his route and gets to specific points, the attention to detail, just overall technique is something that's going to have to really be worked on. And again, we'll talk a little bit more on that in just a moment as well. He does have very small hands actually as well, especially for his size and how he plays. However, he had only a 2.1% drop rate, one of the absolute best in college football, so very few drops to his name. However, I will say that there were times where I thought he had the ability to go up and get a football where it wasn't necessarily a drop, but he had an opportunity to get it, and it didn't come down with it at times. So it's at least worth noting, but again, his 2.1% drop rate, more than enough, shows that he's more than capable of plucking the ball out of the air. He plays with strong hands, so I'm not overly concerned about that specific aspect. We talked about being a little bit over-competitive. Suspension for violation of team rules, ejected in a game for fighting. So sometimes that super competitiveness will get a little bit of the best of him, and it has cost him at times. And then this isn't necessarily a negative, but I think it's worth pointing out as well. Two people that I really trust when it comes to film evaluation. Ben Fennell did not have him, had him as a second or third round guy. So not a first round guy, a second or third round guy. And Daniel Jeremiah didn't have him in his top 50. Those are two really insanely bright minds when it comes to scouting players. And neither of them really, had them in their top 50, right? So, I guess theoretically, Ben could have had him in that range, but he had him as a second, third round guy. And again, Daniel Jeremiah didn't have him in his top 50. So that's not to say that he can't be a good player. That's just to say that if you're taking him in round 1 as a potential, first day wide receiver, that may be a little bit rich. You may be reaching a little bit for him based on where he is currently in his development. Now, I know if you wanted Daniel Jeremiah or Ben Fennell's grades, you would have went out and read their specific grades. But I also view him as a more early to mid second round guy. I think he's more in that like 40 to 50 range is probably where I would put him. But I don't have an issue. Like, if you want to draft him like 35, 32, like 33, like early round 2, I don't think you're that far off. I don't, we'll get to comparisons in just a moment, but kind of where T. Higgins was drafted beginning of round 2, I think that feels about right for this type of player. So again, it's not necessarily a negative. Everyone's going to have a slightly different grade on players because everyone has their own taste and stuff. But again, Jeremiah and Fennell are two of the best, and again, not in top 50 and second or third round grade from Ben. So just something to note if all of a sudden you see him get taken really early, it'll just go against some of the consensus that's out there right now. My final thoughts on George Pickens are a couple things. If you draft him, I do think you're going to have a little bit of patience. I think he can come in and contribute from day one. I don't have any questions about that. But if sort of in a Devontae Adams-esque career trajectory, right? First year flashes, second year maybe some struggles. I know there were injury issues that Adams had to deal with, but second year more like really trying to put the pieces together and going through some struggles. And then third year, fourth year is where you started to really see him take off. I could see Pickens have a very similar situation where, his first couple of years, maybe he deals with a couple injuries, really trying to figure out the nuance of being a professional wide receiver, but more take off in year 3 or year 4. But if you have the patience and you're willing to give him the time, I really do think that he can develop into a top tier wide receiver in this league if he hits his ceiling. And he checks a ton of things that the Packers are looking for. The athleticism, the youth, it's certainly a need that they have. And again, being able to play on the outside, left side, right side, etc. Ultra competitive, SEC school. I mean, he hits every box. Zach Cruz put it perfectly of like, this is the 2022 version of Eric Stokes last year. Super athletic, super young, fit in need, ultra competitive, same SEC school. Like, this is the same guy. It's just wide receiver instead of corner. So it'll be interesting to see if they go that same route and take Pickens, the, again, 2022 version of what 2021 Eric Stokes was. Last but not least, to me, he plays more as a power wide receiver, and he doesn't even have the ideal strength yet. He's 21 years old. He's going to get in an NFL weight room and put on that functional strength. Okay, what happens when that happens? And he's an effective wide receiver right now to all levels of the field, deep, intermediate, short, etc., and he's not even close to honing his craft as a route runner, putting together a release package, having a plan of attack, understanding defenses, all of those things. What happens if this guy all of a sudden puts on that functional strength and plays even more as a physical wide receiver while learning the nuances of playing the game? Like, all of a sudden, you are in a very good spot. And again, he has the ability to be a very special player. As far as comps go, I see a little Mike Williams, the Chargers wide receiver. I see a little T. Higgins. I see a little Des Bryant at times. All of those sort of come to mind when I'm watching him. Again, he has a ways to go before he hits those sort of ceilings, but that's the type of player I really do think he can become, and he certainly should be, and I think will be in play for the Packers. Whether that's in round 1 or 2 will remain to be seen, but definitely somebody that I expect to be fairly high on Green Bay's draft board. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. Always appreciate it. We'll be right back here tomorrow, but until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.